Hey guys, today I want to talk about the concept of defending and how much to defend. Okay, this is an important thing that even I struggle with this quite often, and I think a lot of players do. So I'm gonna put it out this way, kind of bluntly to start. Uh, if you defend against everything, you defend against nothing. Okay. So, like, if you are trying to stop every possible thing that can occur to you within a game like StarCraft, you are now not stopping anything. So, think about that, right? Like, if you are defending every single tech, every single possible attack that can occur, you're sacrificing something somewhere, right? So, in a manner of speaking, you're not really defending everything. I guess you're defending perhaps various attacks that can occur, but you will leave yourself wide open in other areas, your tech, your macro, your expansion, something like that. It's not going to work out. Like, so for instance, let's use StarCraft 1 Terran versus Protoss. I think that's always a good example to use. If you try to defend every single thing, like, let's say you're like, oh God, I don't know what's going on. Okay, well, let's get mines and turrets and siege mode and scanners. Yeah. Okay, that's what, and we'll make enough units that we don't die. It's like, well, that's not going to do very well. Even if your opponent was doing something that would be stopped by that, they can kind of just change their route a little bit because you've overinvested in that defense, and now they can go ahead and do things like expand extra. So this is something that even at the pro level, people definitely have struggled with in the past. Something that really comes to mind, this was something that I noticed back in Heart of the Swarm in GSL tournaments, that the second tier Protoss players were beating the top tier Protoss players in Protoss versus Protoss. And I thought this was the strangest thing until I kind of looked at the builds and saw what was happening. And basically what it was that the top tier Protoss players were trying to counter every single thing. Right? So like they would go like blink stalkers, kind of defensively, and get observers. And then their opponents would just take one risk, right? They'd be like, okay, if you go DTs, I die. But now I have 4 more blink stalkers than you. Okay, there you go. Suddenly that's a huge advantage, and that player that's better, that higher tier Protoss player, is now behind because they're trying to defend against too many things rather than take a bit of a risk to optimize the build a bit more. Now, that's not to say you always need to be taking a risk. Like, that's a very specific circumstance that I actually think fits into this discussion pretty well and is a real life thing to point out that has occurred. But it's more like it's important to try to play on the edge of safety. And of course, sometimes it's going to bite you in the ass to play on the edge of safety, but you want to have just exactly enough to defend something rather than too much to defend it. So here, let me make another example here. So let's say that you're trying to defend an area. Again, we'll just use Terran versus Protoss. And your opponent is making like a really big army. Okay, a very, very large army. And you're like, well, let's stop him from attacking me. So you build a ton of static D. You put like all your depots out in front of your siege tanks and lay 1,000,000 mines and siege everything up and build a ton of turrets. Well, they don't need to attack into that, right? And suddenly you put a ton of time, effort, money, attention, all of these different resources that are important into this one thing. And you're hoping that he's going to hit into you like a Mack truck into a wall. But that isn't something that your opponent would have to do in this circumstance, right? So what you want to do is defend just on the edge, where it's like, okay, if they attack, I'm going to stop it. It won't get completely slaughtered. But at the same time, I'm doing something else with that money to try to gain advantages elsewhere, whether that is expanding or harassing or getting those additional upgrades, just something like that. I think that this is a really, really important concept as people get better at the game to understand. And in fact, I think it's something that even if you don't if you're not all that good or something, it's something that can help you to more enjoy the game when you're watching. Now tell me if this has happened to you before, where you look at something like maybe you're watching a pro game, and this has happened to me where I'll see like a great professional gamer lose to something, like, you know, it'll be some sort of, you know, silly rush that you hit all the time in whatever league you're on. And you'll think to yourself, wow, actually I would have held that. My build holds that, right? But here's the thing. That's also why you are not a pro gamer, right? Is because you kind of have these things that you do that like counter things harder. You're like, well, I don't die to zealot rushes in this situation because I always have a bunker there. And it's like, oh, but that costs you extra money, right? And you weren't playing on the very edge, and you weren't relying on every single skill that you have to try to pull you through that circumstance. So even though that might look kind of funny and silly to see a pro gamer die to something like that, that's almost like an important part of what makes a great player great, is that they are skimping on absolutely everything to try to get every advantage possible, right? So yeah, I think that's a very, yeah, I hope that kind of makes some sense to you, and you can kind of get more out of it with that example there. But yeah, so let me kind of reiterate this a little bit, right? If you try to play too safe, it's like the most certain risk that there is. So like I personally, I don't like playing risky. I like to kind of have a game plan for everything. But you absolutely cannot. Just to put this into perspective, right? The greatest player of any game of all time, Flash, his win rate is like 70%, which is head and shoulders above everyone else. But that still means that 3 out of 10 games he's going to lose. You know, out of the most important games that he plays, 3 out of 10 are still going in the loss category, despite everyone unanimously agreeing he's by far the best. So even in that circumstance, and his style is kind of an all-encompassing, super smart, best mechanics, best decision-making, best understanding, and still 3 out of 10 games are being lost. So definitely you have to kind of look at it in that light, right? Like, you will be losing games. So don't force yourself to lose games by trying to play too safe and reduce risks to zero. There's going to be worse players that beat you. There's going to be better players that you beat sometimes if you're playing in this manner, right? Like, I mean, you can play like the safest, most defensive thing ever, but you're going to be way better than your opponent to grind out like 100% win rates, right? It's not as much of a realistic thing to do. So definitely make sure you're not putting yourself behind every game by trying to defend every single scenario. Choose things that fit into your build order. I guess that's the last little part I'll talk about here. It's important that you don't try to take a sharp right turn, right? Like, don't just immediately like U-turn your strategy. You got to keep the flow of what you're already doing. You can't change everything that you're doing when you scout something, right? Like, let's say that you have 2 factories and you're adding 2 more factories, and you scan and, oh my God, like, carriers are on the way. And then you can't cancel your factories and go Marine Medic, right? You can't do that. That isn't going to work. That's too slow. You have to do something that fits into your strategy. You have to kind of, instead of taking a hard right turn, what you want to do is curve to defend things, right? And sometimes that's honestly, it's gonna be more fun for you to play like that anyways, because you're gonna be able to use some more creativity. It's not always gonna be something that's like, oh, on this supply you get this building to do this, to counter that. It's like, well, those things will occur and do occur, and that's important to know. But just make sure that whatever you're doing at the moment, whatever way you've steered the game, you're just making this a little bump to defend the next thing that's coming from your opponent. All right, I hope that this kind of rambling made sense to you. It's a bit of a deep topic, and I actually have a lot of other things that are related to this that I want to talk about, but I'll leave those for another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Please subscribe and hit that notification button. See you later.